as a bloated white face on the ceiling of a borrowed room, talking to me all night in words I am too high to understand. So here we see that the poet is now talking about a bloated white face he has through his own drug-addled mind, as well as his poignant grief, his extreme longing to see this woman he has conjured up or brought upon the ceiling of a borrowed room. Now, this could be a hotel room somewhere abroad. He has conjured up that white face, the image of a ghostly form. And why has he done this? So badly is his wish to converse with this person, this woman, this ghost who has left him, that he has actually brought her back. Now, we have seen so many movies in which we see that a protagonist is taking drugs in order to see, to willfully see a person who has died and gone away from their life. And we see this person is experimenting with various drugs in order either to forget the reality or maybe to go into a reality that is, so away from the real life into a past where he can converse with that person whom he has lost. If only one could enter the past. So, as a violin creeping through the trees in front of Humboldt University, and I understood music as the hunger that eats those it stokes. So now again he is talking about music, the capacity of music for catharsis, to bring out the sadness or the emotions. We could call Jeetthayil a poet of moods, a poet given to violent and differing moods. And music has such a power on him. Now he's taking us to the Humboldt Berlin University and he says that this violin music is so strong and it is carried on into the soul of the listener. It is cathartic. It makes you weep with sadness and joy. Everywhere we see life and death coming together. And it eats the very person that it stokes. Jeetthayil refers to poetry as a lost art. He says that we are the practitioners, we poets are the practitioners of a lost art, and we are priests of this religion, of a planet that is dead. And this religion, these priests of this religion, cannot make any new converts, but can only speak to those who are already converts. So he considers poetry and music as such a powerful medium to speak to like-minded people. Bruce King, another writer, states that Jeetthayil's works are so incredible. He is a craftsman whose poems require one not merely to enjoy. He says, I myself have to work in order to understand his poems. I have to put in hard work in order to enjoy and to, understand it fully. Keki and Daruwala refers to Jeetthayil as an incredible craftsman who is never obscure, whose works, whether it be on the mundane or the profound, it is never obscure. And it is very well structured, well crafted. We can say that he is quite a wordsmith as far as similes and structures are concerned. As the careful lizard that patrols my brain, as the dazzled bird who steals gems, junk, whatever comes to build, and what did I build but a house of dust? The lizard is symbolic. Again, it is a creature that symbolizes sunlight, and we know all little children, we learn in science that the lizard can change according to its surroundings. It has the ability to camouflage itself. So this is also taken as the human trait. Are we to pretend that everything is fine? Is the poet who suffers this deep, horrendous sorrow, is he to continue doing the everyday activities of life and live merely, as if nothing has happened? So, like the lizard that patrols my brain. Now, the lizard again, we have learned that the tail is cut off, a new tail comes on. Regeneration, it also is symbolic of regeneration. And where is the poet? How is he supposed to go through this grief? And he mocks the very process and says that, how people say, could you write an obituary in a few lines? Is it actually possible to feel for somebody, to write your true feelings in a few lines? Now we see that this man is missing somebody, as someone who is part of himself. It is like his very limb has been torn apart. Now he is speaking. Is it like that dazzled bird? We know of the story of the magpie, the bird who collects the little gems and little trinkets and goes and hides it. And that is our situation too. Do we too, wait for that fallen drops of love, of memories, and do we too keep it in our secret stack, our treasure? Is it those little moments that must help us, that must suffice for us to go on in the journey of life, like that magpie who hoards those little tiny treasures? And he says, and what did I build but a house of dust? And he is comparing himself to this bird, and he says, what have I built of my life? Just a house that is made of dust. Now again, the word dust brings the image, from dust we are born and to dust we return. This talks about the imminent decay, the destruction or the inevitable loss of life. Everything in our human life is transient. The material goods that we may purchase, the house, the land, the plots that we may buy, our very life itself, everything is subject to decay, destruction, and inevitable loss and death. All of us have to embrace death. The complexity of human life and the existential question of what is the true meaning of life. So as a philosophy, we can see that existentialism is taking a lot of importance in the poem. And to take a little bit of background of Jeetthayil, one of his very famous novels called The Law, is about an artist who is, the novel opens where the artist is grieving for his wife. His wife, Aki, has taken her life. She has always been in depression and she is always saying that I wish to die. And he describes it as her lifelong desire to die. She finally accomplished it by hanging from the ceiling, by taking her own life. And the poet here is seen taking her ashes. The protagonist is going through the airport security and he is having to explain all this. And on one hand, we see how deep is his grief, how it wells up inside him. And on the other hand, he has to go about through the daily routine of life. The people in the airport or the security, they're not concerned about what is going on in his life, but he has to explain and he has to take these ashes to such and such a place. And there is that physical activity of going through these motions. And in the novel, it is how this man is then descending into drugs. And there is a particular drug which is described as Mew Mew. This drug is taken in order to forget himself, to bring on a sort of amnesia, or I would say he wants to get like he wants to lose all consciousness, one can say, so that he can remove himself from grief. And at the same time, He looks into all the moments that was the essence of their life together. Those little memories and life every day, that little glimpses of life in which we see that the story ends in him trying to attain a redemption or to process his grief, more like he is trying and striving to process his grief. Now, this story is quite similar to this poem, and all this is again very much influenced by Jeetthayil's own life, where his wife Sakti is, was a very integral part of his life and his career. And he says that it is Sakti who has actually brought out the essence of him as a poet, and she died a sudden death. She was taken away from his life due to an illness which was very sudden, and the poet is never able to get over this grief, and he further sunk into drugs, alcohol. He has tried to numb his being, but he says that in every moment, in every little instance, and throughout the journey of life, he keeps seeing her. And again, in this novel, The Law, there is a paragraph where the protagonist is conjuring up or bringing up his dead wife's face onto the ceiling of his hotel room, simply because he wants to talk to her once again, and he wants to tell her what is going on in his life. He cannot move on. He must move on, but it must be with her. He has to take this grief along with him. As a ritual between newly-wed insects, as an insect, horned, shivering, convulsed, tiny Tyrannosaurus throws. So now he's saying, even in the ritual of mating between two newly-wed insects, just as one would observe, now he's going into these very tiny aspects of life. And in that mating process, which is something that will bring forth the progeny of this insect, here too he sees life appearing on earth. And in all these life, he is seeing the death that has occurred to him, the spiritual death that has occurred to him. And he says, these horned, shivering insects convulsed, this little tiny Tyrannosaurus throws. And in this tiny convulsion of the sexual union, he sees life in all its enormity, in all its greatness, the process of creation. As the white of my beard, whiteness beyond snow or stupor, and in the whiteness of my beard, in my coming old age, or in the, I'm becoming older. I have lost you. You have parted from me, but I must walk on into the evening of my life. And in the whiteness of my beard, in the whiteness beyond snow or stupor, even to the end, to that inevitable end. And stupor again refers to the insensibility, the near unconsciousness that can be brought by drugs as well as grief. As the abandoned child you were, who said goodbye to wind and water, stepped into the opposite of air, said no to earth blood. As now he's comparing that lost person to that abandoned child you were. You who said goodbye to wind and water. What does wind and water signify? Wind and water, air and water is the form of life. Water is a word. It is used as a symbol in almost majority of Jeetthayil's poems. They all have the word water. And how he says that, water is everywhere. It is present always in our life, whether it be the life blood or whether it be the water that we drink, the rivers and streams that make up the world. Everywhere water is teeming with life. But you, part of my soul, my love, who has, you have said goodbye to wind and water, stepped into the opposite of air. The opposite of air is deadness, the place where there is no longer movement or air. You said no to earth blood. You have given up this earth. Now, on the one level, on the microcosm of losing one person to death, this is grief of loss. There is also, on the other hand, the macrocosm of the human self losing its own organic identity, which as a child, or in our young state, we are so connected to nature and the world around us. And as we grow older, these questions of existentialism and being inorganic stalks us. Like Seamus Heaney says, the death of a naturalist, there is the death of the human being. And after a certain stage, we go into the songs of experience, and we are all having to suffer the pangs of sorrow. Baudelaire, Charles Baudelaire, his muse, also in one of his poems, where he says the alchemy of sorrow. He says that every moment there is birth in one part of the world and death in another. Everything speaks about renewal and regeneration and death at the same time. Even the very ashes, a forest fire may create ashes, and the entire forest is burned down. Think of it. But these very ashes become nutrient rich soil in which a new forest will blossom. So now he is speaking to her and saying, you have said no to earth blood, said stop to body blood, arrived as white shadow without features or desire, as a drop of sacrificial oil. And now you have said goodbye to the physical world, to the physical body, and you have become without features or desire. You have turned into the ghost of my dreams, a drop of sacrificial oil. You have become that reality that exists only in my mind. There is no visible person. So this speaks about the human existence and the complexity of the human being, moving on from the realm of innocence into the realm of experience. And all these horrible, strange paths that man is tempted to pass through, and as well as the grief that one can never escape. There is no going back into the past. Innumerable stories and movies and plays have been created of time travel, of going back into the past, correcting that one error, and coming back. A few of Jeetthayil's works are Gemini, English, Apocalypso, the errors, the errors that are correct. That is how he calls that collection of poetry. So these are all the errors in life, but they are inevitable. Made your atoms integrate, tumbling, dripping under in your hurry to enter the kingdom of eternal life. This brings to mind the character Aki, who is always telling her husband in a very simple way. She says, I see myself growing older and I wish to die. So now there is a reference or an allusion to the book where the poet says that you were in a hurry to go into your eternal life. You wanted your atoms to integrate and become one with the mud or one with the ashes, and just move into nature, go back into that eternal life. And you chose to kill yourself. Now, when we look back into the poet's life of his wife Sakti, who died, here we can say that in a way, her death, which was of natural causes, feels to the poet as something that, it is almost like, why did you give up on me? Why did you willfully give up your life on earth? We know that it is not a willful action, but to the poet, it feels almost as if she had a choice. Why wasn't our love strong enough to keep you back here? I think this is what I feel that we hear in these words. As illness as liver disease and the river of red wine that cures it. Now he's comparing it as illness as liver disease. Again, we see the There is a lot of personal element. The poet has for a long time suffered from hepatitis C and liver disease. He is in a critical liver condition and is often in his interviews said that time for me on this earth is limited. So he says, at least as the black grape that made the wine, or the wine that is, the balm to my sorrows. We know that he was also an alcoholic at one point. As a black burn on the leg that appears overnight and stays for years, as an unexplainable lump on the shoulder. And as one is growing older, we have all these marks that has shown us that life is happening to us. There is the black burn on the leg that speaks of a particular accident or maybe just a skin condition. It appears overnight. All of us are plagued by various health issues that simply come into our being overnight, simply to tell us that the cells of our body is growing inevitably older, or a lump suddenly coming on. And the lump, we know the word lump brings to mind cancer or malignant, as well as benign tumors or growths, unwanted, but they come into our body as inconsolable lumps in our mind. As the sound of someone close crying softly in the night, or as those tears of one who has gone into bed, a man or woman who has been showing a pleasant face, smiling to the world outside, and in the dead of the night, in the darkness, covering his face and crying and sobbing into the pillow, such that he is alone in his grief. No one will understand the extent of his grief. As a dead girl with blood red lips, blood red eyes and cheeks, blood red wrung neck. So, as a dead girl, now he draws the image of a dead girl with blood red lips, blood red eyes and cheeks, blood red wrung neck. Now, the wrung neck again brings to mind the image of the protagonist's wife, Aki, who has hung herself. And in the novel, there is a particular paragraph which says that, the protagonist is going in to look at the corpse of his wife. And when he looks at her face, he sees that her neck is covered by brown red spots. It is a wrung neck, and there is blood red spots on her cheeks. And he calls it blossoms or flowers that never got to bloom. It seems to be symbolic of the life within her that could not live to a grand old age, of which would be filled with a lot of joys. So this is symbolic of the life that was cut off all of a sudden. And blood red wrung neck, this is again could be the image of his wife who died, and he had to endure seeing her lifeless form going to be buried. And now he says, as crematorium smell of camphor and mead, or the smell of the crematorium in which there is camphor being burnt and the meat or the bones being crushed into ashes, that smell too of that is the smell of death, of human life being eaten by the fire, as whatever you want. And finally, this is written in such a symbolic manner that all through the poem, the reader, we are asking questions and we are also understanding the magnitude of life, the complexity of life. And finally, the poet makes a request to his partner who has died, as whatever you want, just come back. It's the most poignant line. Just come back. As the drugs that I consume, as the drink that I may numb my body with, as the grape that makes the wine, as the ash, as all natural phenomena, as life, death, rebirth, or like even as the crematorium, even in your dead form as the woman with the neck wrung, as the little abandoned girl who has said goodbye to earth life, as your form as a girl or a woman or the corpse, in any form, in thought, in action, in the every form of life as I endure and see it on this earth. Just come back. He's calling out to her and saying, I cannot move on without you. Merely just come back to me. And so we can see the structure of the poem. It is only in the very last bit we see that the simile, that long simile, is completed. It is this love that must come back as all these teeming, all these natural phenomena. So Jeetthayil is a very important, a very prominent poet. He was born in 1959. So now if we take some of the poets, we know that all poets are very much influenced by the socio-economic conditions, by their surroundings, by the situations around them. So if we take many poets during, for example, during the World War, both World Wars, or all the various independence wars all over the world, we see that poets, we have the war poets writing about war and destruction. We have poets like Wordsworth and Shelley who wrote about nature and the human spirit of revolution. So these are all poets who write about the external nature and also man's relationship to it. But in Jeetthayil, we can say that he lived in a period post independence where we can say that man was turning inward. Now, he is not talking so much about the external circumstances or the political situations, but rather he is looking inward into his personal, private circumstances, into his experiences as a human being. And we see a lot of there is identity crisis, or he's alienated in a sense from his language and place. There is one of his very famous poems called Malayalam's Ghazal, in which we see that he has written ghazals too. Ghazals are of Asian origin, and he says that I am born in Malayalam, but he tells himself, Jeet, write a couplet in Malayalam if you dare. This is to show that even though he was born in the Malayalam language and Kerala has an impact on him, he has never lived in this place. So this is a part of him only by birth, where he says, I listen to a Gujarati garba in the morning and open my hair to Malayalam in the night. So, we see that there is a lot of varying identities at play here. And he says that I was brought up by a father who read Baudelaire, translated it. He had an uncle who translated Charles Baudelaire into Malayalam. And this uncle is also one of his major influences. Thank you.